the study was to look at and explore the effect of a 16-week rhythmic movement intervention on specific rugby-related biomotor skills. And this was done amongst academy players. And really, it was a novel study, which made it a bit difficult because there hasn't been anything done like this, particularly in rugby, but intervention-based as well. And the benefits of dance have been studied in literature, has been reported on in literature. We particularly see the use of not necessarily dance, but yoga. Many teams have used yoga as a recovery method, something to wind down. Other teams have used, for example, maybe one dance style, such as a salsa or anything related along those lines, maybe a line dance as a fun team building experiment, I would say. But this study particularly wanted to implement a rhythmic movement intervention. So essentially, what did the intervention look like over the 16 weeks? So we picked the biomotor skills which were already existing. I looked at the what we would call the testing or field testing protocol. What is existing right now within the rugby program? What are they already testing? What are the players and the coaches familiar with? What are the important biomotor skills which they train and implement on a day-to-day basis? And it included the flexibility, dynamic balance, agility, power, local muscular endurance. The tests which were selected in particularly were tests that were already on the field testing protocol. It was existing. There were some norms for it. In most of the cases, there were norms. So I needed to ensure that once we implement the intervention and we test whether it worked or not, I would be able to look at it and compare it to already standardized or benchmarked values, norms, data. It was important that it was relatable results. It was important that it was results that were testable, that were transferable for both the coaches and the players. A little bit of a timeline and how this practically and logistically played out. The study participants in particular were recruited from Stellenbosch Rugby Academy as well as Western Province Rugby Academy. And then the groups themselves were randomly divided into two groups from there. So it meant that the one part of the group would start the first 8 weeks of an intervention with me, while the other group then for the rest of the 8 weeks or the first 8 weeks would continue with their normal rugby conditioning. This was really just to ensure that when we test against pre and post, we could see whether there were effects or not, and actually where the effect took place, and if there is significant treatment effect following the weeks of intervention. And we needed to make sure that it was the intervention that was causing a significant effect, and not the strength and conditioning training or whatever other training the guys were doing on a daily basis. So in week 1, we had pre-testing with everybody. This was the baseline, which was quite important to see where the guys are at. And then for the first 8 weeks, we had a rhythmic movement intervention in the one group, and then no intervention in the other group, but they continued their normal training. And then post the 8 weeks, we had a post test, which would be important then to see pre-post improvements. And then what was also important was 4-week washout period, which happened so that we can ensure that there was a treatment effect and not a delayed response or learning effect which took place. And then starting the second 8 weeks, we had a pre-test again, baseline, same as the first week, did the 8 weeks again, and then had a post-test. So the group now that didn't do the intervention in the first 8 weeks had to do the intervention now from week 16 to 23. And then we had a post-test. So evidently in the results of the study, so what it highlighted in the 3 main outcomes of the study was that the intervention was indeed effective, improving some biomotor skills. However, it couldn't be solely attributed to the intervention. And that was based on the fact that we saw some improvements even when the intervention was not implemented. However, it must be noted that the statistically significant and the significant treatment effects that were seen when the intervention was implemented. So there was an improvement above and beyond at the time when the intervention was implemented. And then what I also found, which was quite promising, was that there is potential for positional group differences. So it means that if I had to redesign this entire intervention, and I design it specifically relating it and catering for positional group differences, then it means there would also be some improvements according to the positions. Initially, I didn't do this because we just took the big group and we decided to give everyone the same rhythmic movement intervention. So yeah. So now, more importantly, to the practical implementation side of it, how can the rhythmic movement then be applied and utilized in other sports? This is everybody's big question, and it's quite simple in 3 steps. So first of all, what I would say to coaches who would like to implement this, I would say first ask the purpose of why we would like to incorporate rhythmic movement intervention and what biomotor skills you would like to target. So here it would be the focus. Is it for speed, flexibility? Is it maybe for recovery? Then based on that, the intervention would then be designed accordingly. So for example, with the group that I had now with my guinea pigs, I designed it bearing in mind all biomotor skills, but also bearing in mind that it was pre-season training. So I had all the biomotor skills which I wanted to target. I split it up over the 16 weeks for gradually improving it, gradually getting stronger, etc. So you can alter it and design it accordingly to where it should fit into your program. And then it is important then to take note that you want to target specific biomotor skills. So the specificity of the design and specificity of training is very much important. And then the implementation thereof would obviously then accommodate and complement what you implemented and what you designed originally. So the implementation, this is where the magic happens, and where you would practically present what you designed and why you designed it in the first place. So if we look at, for example, if we take a rugby periodized plan, where would it fit in and how could it possibly fit in? So this would really just help coaches to see the broader picture of where this could possibly fit in and how it could be feasible. I just gave some examples here. For example, if we see during a general preparation phase, this could be quite valuable in starting the guys off with targeting various biomotor skills, but also not burning them out or thinking about overtraining eventually once it comes to specific preparation phase. So here you're still targeting a whole range of skills, but you don't go into the fear of overtraining essentially. It can also then go into or fit into your competitive phase where you could use it maybe as a recovery mechanism. And here I would suggest then taking more in the content itself, incorporating more yoga into it, because then this means you're targeting more recovery style of the intervention. There is still some time for flexibility training and mobility training, and that sort of leads up to your transition phase. Then if we look at a more tactical side of things, so the example here, particularly in the first example, the endurance aspect of the tactical periodization plan, for example, if this had to be a week of training, then I would pick the local muscular endurance part of the rhythmic movement intervention solely. You could, and implementing that maybe once or twice a week for recovery or endurance. Also, it's great after match, pre or post match, because you can still then target flexibility, mobility. It can be used as physical recovery, active recovery, or psychological recovery in that sense. And it's great because the guys aren't just doing their normal active recovery, they're still doing something fun, something exciting, but there's still the element of training in it as well. Then what about some soccer? So in this case over here in the example, I particularly can see it doing as an activation session. And the reason why I would say that is because it can very easily use it to build up to your speed session, which follows, for example, on a Monday and a Wednesday. So using it as activation. So the dynamic balance part of it, the mobility part of the intervention, anything related to your speed session which follows, you could incorporate prior to that as an activation session, and then using the rhythmic movement sessions in that regard, or as a refueling session, again, recovering from the team training which happened before then in the morning, and then focusing and gearing up the lower body for the lower body focus in the gym. Same thing in netball, could be incorporated into your in-season plan where you focus on your SAQ sessions and designing the rhythmic movement intervention in such a way that you're targeting some speed, agility, and quickness. And also during off-season can do exactly the same thing, targeting maybe just for lighter loads, active recovery, still doing some muscular endurance sessions within it. Thank you very much.
Jocelyn, quick, this has been the quickest presentation, but I think it leaves us with a lot of time for questions. And I want to start off the questions with why rhythmic movement, and rugby? Why do you believe this could add value from your personal experience as a dancer?
So thank you for the question, sir. So the reason why I found value in this was as a dancer, I've always heard people talk about and make comments about the quick feet that the rugby players have, the rhythm, and then I wanted to investigate what really is happening. And I tried a little bit of sevens myself, and it was a lot harder than I thought it was. However, I could see a lot of the similarities in the game. There is a lot of rhythm which takes place. You see the line out. In the line out, there's a lot of timing elements which need to take place, the speed, the quickness, the agility to get towards the try line. So in that regard, I think the similarities between the biomotor skills opened up the potential and the opportunity for me to realize, actually, if there's similar biomotor skills, then that means that the one can add value to the other sport.
Sorry, Jocelyn. So Yusuf posed a question, but I'm gonna, before I ask his question, I'm gonna pose you a question like, what will, if let's say I'm a coach and I give you 1 hour per, let's say per week, what will a session typically look like?
So it will start off with a 5-minute aerobic endurance warm-up. And then particularly the body of the session will consist of targeting either 1 or 2 biomotor skills. And then the last 5 or 10 minutes would really focus on static stretching particularly. And this is what the program I followed in my master study itself. And it really showed that there was something that the players could take out of this as well in terms of learning something from the study, and that was really ways to stretch properly, what to stretch properly, and why it is so important. And obviously the body of the session would then depend, the 45 minutes of that would depend on what we're focusing on. So if we had to pick ballet for that week, we do a lot of lower body exercises, mobility. It is not about, I must emphasize, the purpose of the intervention and rhythmic movement is not to teach the guys how to dance or to dance to music. The reason why we called it rhythmic movement was solely because I had to draw from other dance styles as well to come up with these various exercises which would target the biomotor skills that we were trying to improve. So, and then the music just happened to be there to make it more fun, to make it more enjoyable, and for the guys to also practice their coordination and concentration skills at the same time. So yeah, in short, typical session, 10 minutes warm up, dynamic stretches, 45 minutes of the session being focused on whatever biomotor skills we need to target for that week, and the last 5 to 10 minutes would then be taking time for some static stretching, and closing the session.
Okay, thanks for that, Jocelyn. So that leads me into my, you spoke about it earlier that you wanted to have position-specific intervention. So if you, let's say I say today you're going to work with a tight 5, what will typical dances be for the tight 5? Taking in mind these guys are normally your biggest guys in the team, and how will you manage that? And what type of activities will you do with them?
Okay, so for these guys, if we're working with the tight 5, we will concentrate on obviously some slower movements. We'll concentrate on problem areas. We know that these guys are in the front. They're the hard hitters. We need to concentrate on neck, lower back, more upper body, mobility, flexibility, the strength and the power needs to be incorporated. So for them, I do slower movements. For example, I take a ballet and maybe something like contemporary movements, and I would really focus on lengthening and stretching the upper body. So in these dances specifically, there's movements that you can do to lengthen and stretch the upper body, torso, and also doing muscular endurance exercises specifically related to that. That is something I would include as well. And really exercises which target their endurance and strength to keep the repetitive movements. So for them, as opposed to your backline where we do a lot of agility training, more jumps in ballet, maybe more quicker movements, these guys would really suit well with a ballet or something along with a modern, where we can really focusing on the execution of technique.
Okay, so you were actually saying that tight 5 won't remember the routine, that's why you won't do that stuff with them. No, jokes aside. So I'm going to go to Yusuf's question quickly, and this is quite an interesting one. And how can you determine the load in a dance session? And can you give an example of a low intensity session and a high intensity session? This is a very good question, Yusuf.
Thank you, Yusuf. So with the load in dancing, the only way that we can be able to tell this is through heart rate. I was asked this question by the coaches as well. How are you able to say if it's high intensity or low intensity? Well, the heart rate monitoring is the only way that we can do this. I didn't in my study focus on heart rate or monitoring it because I knew it would be low intensity compared to the other sessions that they would do, such as running, doing gym work or anything like that, because most of the time it was low impact things that we were doing. It was body weight exercises that we're doing. The only thing I would say that would be high impact, particularly when it came to high intensity, would have been the warm up, because we had to do an aerobic endurance warm up. And besides that, everything else we were doing in between was a lot of them listening and responding. So we weren't active the entire time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I just think I want to add something to that. I think if we had to do a follow-up on this, it would be to use heart rate monitoring, and in order
Yeah.
to create like a intensity. This is the type of activity that you can use for this specific to achieve that intensity. So
Yeah.
so based on use of questions, I think heart rate is good, and maybe RPEs as well.
RPE. Yes. Session
Yeah,
RPE. Yeah.
and something that they use now is the complexity, and based on that to determine the RPE of the movement as well. So the techniques that they use. So there's a lot of scope for that. But that's a good question with regards to how to determine the intensity. And I think it would be great to do that, and then you can incorporate this much more often. Yeah. So the next question is from Mrs. De Lange. Mr. Lange says, being a dancer herself, I'm very curious, which other dance styles did you use?
I used some modern, I used Latin, particularly salsa. I also used some hip hop, and that was it. Majority of ballet.
Okay, thanks for that. Then Chris, so Chris has been involved with the Fiji Sevens team, and this is quite a good question, Chris, but I've got an easier solution for you. Just watch the movie Titanic, and that will assist you with how to teach the lifting technique. But the question for Jocelyn is, would you ever explore the lifting technique? And if so, what would this look like?
Can you repeat the question, sir?
So there's two parts to the question. Would you ever explore the lifting technique? This could either be in a line out or at a kickoff receive or kick receive. Sure. Yes. And if so, what would this look like? So typically to address those two issues.
Wow, interesting, very interesting question. Immediately when I think about this, it is kind of one of the obvious moves or pieces that you could, as a dancer, that you would see, because for me this just shouts what we call in dancing pas de deux, which means dancing with a partner. And if you've watched any dance video or movie where there's a dancer involved or ballet dancers involved, you usually have the guy lifting the girl in the air exactly the same way. I'm not comparing rugby players to ballet dancers, but the point of the story is the lifting technique could be very, very, very interesting in terms of how it's executed. The movement analysis on that, I think, would add a lot of value to tell us what sort of movements and rhythmic movements we could do to improve the lifting technique. And I think it could be quite valuable in terms of improving or changing the technique for players, because as it's being done now, we see that it hasn't really changed much over the years as opposed to your scrum or anything like that. But it could be something really exciting to look into. So yeah, why not?
Yeah, I just want to add on to that, Chris, maybe also so rhythmic part, because a lot of in a line out, in a kick, especially the lifter and the jumper for that, he needs to move quickly. So if you can develop that quick feet and that movement, and then you can solve that problem. But also, if you can improve someone's strength, that will lead to so you could lift much quicker, move much quicker. So that can contribute, even though if you don't mimic the real movement. So, but dance and the rhythmic movement can create like an underlying or that biomotor ability can be improved, and indirectly it improves the lifting.
I would just like to add something to that, sir. So I kept these movements in mind as well. So for example, something that I did, because I did test vertical jump, was one of my tests that I did, and I was aware that, you know, there is these movements, for example, like the lift in a line out or in the kickoff. So what I did was, particularly in a part of the ballet sessions, what I did was the guys did a lot of moves where they had to jump, and we focused on really using toes, the feet, the ankles, getting that explosiveness. And yes, it was with the body weight, but the landing technique, really getting the feet strong, how to be explosive in the air. So I did take that into consideration while doing rhythmic movement, while doing this intervention and designing it.
Okay, thanks for that. So Stefan asked this question. Using the definition of rhythmic movement as the execution of different motor skills, integration and sequencing of actions between limbs, timing and spatial precision, would rhythmic movement be useful for players doing rehab?
Yes, because essentially when we're doing rehab, any sort of rehab, what you are trying to improve is that coordination and is getting the motor skill back to where it used to be when you performed it pre-injury. So in rehab, I think the important part of rehab is to get that, you know, coordination going again, to get the sequencing of the limbs. And maybe it's not limbs, maybe it's just the firing order and the motor neurons which you're trying to get going. But essentially there is that huge part of coordination which goes, I see, lost, if I can call it like that, once you become injured.
Oh, and I want to add on to that. You spoke earlier about that it can be used for recovery. What will a typical session, a rhythmic movement session, look like in order to enhance recovery?
So with that, I think an important part and what I've seen come up in literature as well is really the influence of music, which is not really something that I focused on for the session. The music was really in my sessions, it was really just there for the guys to get used to a beat to perform this to once they had the exercises and for them to get excited about the sessions. But I think music is quite important, and the types of music which you use in a recovery session is important. Something very calming, and that's why I said the use of yoga would be advisable if we had to do a recovery session, rhythmic movement recovery session. So the music in that case would be important, and I think it is valuable to say that when you do a recovery session, a lot of time needs to be spent depending on where this recovery session falls. So if it's post match day, I would say then more of sort of your meditating, your active recovery, still doing your stretching, still doing some things leading up to your first session of the week, whether it's a strength session or a speed session. So yeah, instead of focusing on maybe new rhythmic movements or exercises, I would maybe revisit some of the ones that they know, but then adding to that something to do with yoga, so we can switch off mentally, but also refocus for the new week. With the guys, the 1 week in the session, I know they had a late week on the Wednesday evening, and the Thursday morning when I had them, I could see that, you know, it wasn't all, they weren't all focused and ready to go. And immediately I decided to do a yoga session with them, and it was an energizing session. So I had them on the floor, and I had the yoga playing, and after that I did 30 minutes of the rhythmic movements that they did the previous week, and you could see that the guys were a lot better and geared up for the next week. Yeah.
Okay, so linked on, and I want to lead on to the next one. We spoke about performance, we spoke about recovery, and now we spoke about rehab. What psychological effect did you think your intervention had on the players?
I think the fact that the guys looked forward to the rhythmic movement sessions, even if it was just because it was a break away from their normal training, I think that itself had a positive psychological benefit, because they knew that they were training, but it was different. There was music, so they were training without feeling like they were training. And I think the fact that I had the guys in the second week, I had the new set of guys that came in and did the intervention, and I still had some of the old guys that didn't want to go to their normal training because they wanted to do the rhythmic movement session. So I think regarding that, it gives them a time to switch off from the everyday demands of their training, because they're living, sleeping, breathing rugby, and finally they get to do something where there's a bit of music involved, and that just makes them feel a lot more relaxed, and it makes them feel a lot more positive, and they can focus on something other than what they've been doing the whole week or the entire day.
Okay, so if you had to do a study on to determine the effect of this, how will you propose it? So let's say we want to determine the psychological effect of dance on rugby players. What will we do?
Well, first of all, with the if I had to redesign this, obviously with bearing that in mind, I will have to implement this session. Particularly, I would do it differently, because we need to implement this maybe on a Monday if the guys had a session or match on the Saturday. So we do it first day in the week and maybe midweek, and first thing in the morning before anything has even happened, or before there's even any sort of demands placed on them. And then what I would do is I would propose that the guys do take a questionnaire, a psychological questionnaire, which doesn't exist yet. So that would have to obviously then be implemented and tested, and find out from them how are they feeling prior to doing the intervention, and also taking the questionnaire again to see how are they feeling after doing this, to get that response in terms of emotionally, where are they at, how did they sleep, how we would usually test the psychological effects of a session. And then from there, we would still follow the same procedure in terms of pre and post test, for the guys that did do the intervention in the way where there was a psychological element to it, and the guys that maybe didn't do the intervention at all. And then we can compare those that did do it. How was the psychological? Was there an influence? Why was there an influence? And we know already before there's even any sort of movement related, music in itself has shown to provide psychological benefits. So even if we don't get the rhythmic movements to add the benefits, we know that just the fact that they're hearing music and they're exposed to music and the type of music, we know that there'll already be a benefit.
Okay, so you touched on something important, the effect of music. You think we should incorporate music more in our sessions? Even though if we're doing a tactical session or a technical session, you think that will have an effect on how we execute the skills?
I think it would be overload of music. It would, because it will be playing all the time, or it'll be used in every session. I think for some guys this might be a distraction. Everyone learns differently. I think the effect of the music will be lost, because they will be so used to hearing it. And the focus then would be on the music that's playing and not necessarily focusing on the tactics. So I don't think it would be wise to add music to all the sessions. I think focusing it on 1 or 2 sessions specifically could help, because I mean, when the guys go into the gym to do their personal sessions or their one-on-ones, they do listen to music, they play music, they sing along. When they go on tour, they listen to music by themselves, and not everybody necessarily does or listens to the same music, so you have to take that into consideration as well. So no, I think pick the battle.
Okay, thanks for that. So here's a question from Mr. Langas. He's quite interested in this topic. With regards to the dance moves used, which level did you base the training on? Example, elementary, intermediate, or advanced, or did you combine levels?
I combined levels because I had to start elementary, and then when they got used to it and they could do it, I had to go advanced. Not just because of that, but because also there's biomotor skills that you would have to, or there's certain moves that are, as we would call it in dancing, intermediate level or advanced level, that I had to expose the guys to eventually and later in the weeks, because that was the only way to target those skills.
Okay, so and Philip's asked a question, and that relates to some of the questions that I've asked now. So he speaks about team culture, but I'm going to use his question and revamp it a bit and speak about, can you use rhythmic movement for team building? And I want you to refer, I don't know if you can recall the session we had with SK during the drought. So touch on that a bit, and that effect on the player's mood, just the state, the climate within the club, and if you can share that story as well.
So the very first session that I had was with the SK boys, very skeptical at first. And at this stage in point, when I approached them, I also needed to feel what the intervention would look like eventually. So I tested it on them essentially first. When we started, you've got these big guys that are doing moves they've never done, and the smaller guys looking at them. You've got the captain completely falling over his feet, the rest of the team laughing. There's, the cheering on, the helping. You could see the quieter guys maybe stepping up, getting the moves right, mocking about. There's some joking and some banter around. And I think that was the first sign for me to say that even if all fails and we don't get the result that we want, at least we can say that this will bring the guys back together, or it will create a team culture of where the guys can just bond and realize that they're also human beings before they are players. I mean, with all the demands they had to go through, they come back and they just let go for a little bit with this rhythmic movement intervention. And the point was not, I told them from the beginning, it is not about perfection, it is about passion. So keep moving at the end of the day. So I definitely think in terms of team culture, a rhythmic movement session such as this could really be used for some team bonding, team culture, to lift the guys' spirit. And it also gives chance for the guys that usually shine in other areas to take the lead and take over a little bit. You can see everybody sort of with rugby, it really separates some players from others because of experience, because of knowledge, because of skill. And with this rhythmic movement intervention, everyone is literally in the same boat. And that's a humbling experience for everybody, because they know they have to all start from the very beginning. It's like playing rugby for the first time.
Yeah. So and you spoke about now. So your idea was for team culture and to improve the team dynamics and a bit of team building. Now, I want to get back to Chris's question where he asked about, let's say this is a session to improve, where you also look at technique efficiency or efficiency of performing the technique. How will your view change? How will your role change as the facilitator or the conditioning coach? So if you needed to look at efficiency.
So in terms of that, I would have to get in and consult the S&C coach or any other specialist coach who usually works with the guys for second pair of eyes and ears. And I think like any other sports or any other move, if I come from a dancer's perspective, the efficiency comes when you can do something over and over again and you can execute it with ease, and you can see that someone's comfortable in the way that they execute it. Even though this was just dance exercises, eventually you could see how the guys were getting quite comfortable with what they were doing. Just even if it was a grapevine, which is literally a side together side tap, guys are falling over and laughing, and by the third or fourth week, you could really see them taking it seriously. You can really see them executed with ease. If I asked for something, there was no really thought or scramble behind it. They were confident in what they were executing. So in that regard, in terms of efficiency and executing it, your specialist coaches would have to work closely together with myself and the guys, because the efficiency of the movements and how they execute it will really come from doing it with ease and executing it without any second thoughts, just like any other skill.
Okay. Then just a quick question, and I want to follow that up with technique efficiency. So you don't want these guys to become dancers. That's and your main aim is just to use a different training method to improve a specific biomotor ability, and to get the player away from his normal environment. So how will you what will you do in order to prevent that it becomes a dance movement and still keep that rugby movement, that rugby dynamic?
So in order to ensure that I don't steer away from the purpose of a rhythm movement intervention and that it doesn't become a dance showcase, the important part really is always going back to the drawing board in terms of what is the biomotor skill firstly that I'm trying to elicit or to try and improve. What is the movement in rugby that is related to that? And then based on that is where the exercise or the dance move, in inverted commas, closely related to that comes in play. I think where it becomes a dance move or where it becomes dancing and not rhythmic movement is when you put 2 or 3 steps in line and you ask them to do it in that order, or you ask the guys to perform it to the music. Sometimes I played the music and they had one exercise that they kept doing, and that is how we did it. And sometimes I turned down the music and I said, it is not about performing it to the music. It is literally just about you focusing on getting the technique of it right and being comfortable with the execution. So in that regard, I think sticking to the purpose of the skill and focusing on the skill that you want to develop, and focusing on the fact that it needs to be related to a rugby move or a rugby set piece, or anything that is sort of, maybe there's something in a match that you're trying to execute or copy. So it needs to be, that training specificity is quite important in that regard when you pick a dance move to make it into an exercise.
Thanks for that, Jocelyn. Because the reason why I asked that question is because in the past, and I think it's the case at the moment as well, is that a lot of teams make use of sprint coaches to come and teach their players the technique. That is good to teach them the technique, but how they apply that technique in a rugby situation is completely different. So they do it on a track, but they never move to the rugby field. They never tuck a ball under them. They never teach them to pass while they're running at speed. So we need to transfer that and keep the rugby dynamics intact as well, because otherwise that player might become a sprinter and you won't stay a rugby player. So it's just important that you keep that in mind. You don't want to teach this player to become a rugby player, but you want to teach him through dance to improve a certain biomotor ability.
Definitely.
Okay. So then Philip.
Thanks.
Philip. Okay. Philip asked, would you use Zumba for rugby players? I hope I pronounced that correctly.
Yep. Okay. I wouldn't. Yes. Yes, I have thought about this idea. I'm actually also a qualified Zumba instructor, so of course I'd be game to do it. And I thought about this only after being qualified, but there is aspects of Zumba. So there's another aspect of Zumba which is called Zumba Fit, or Zumba Strong, or Strong by Zumba, which includes your functional training. Which includes your functional training movements into a sort of dance exercise program. And I thought that if only I knew this when I started my intervention, then it would have changed things. It would have changed things a lot more. In terms of when I do my warm-up, I could have easily used a warm-up from Zumba Strong, because these are functional movements. It's higher intensity. I don't have to worry about which moves will elicit what, or which moves will target what by skill, because essentially what that program is based on is your functional movement, functional moves. And I think it would have been a lot more applicable to rugby players or to sportsmen and women in particular.
Okay, thanks for that, Jocelyn. So Mr. Wiseman's got a question, and this is actually a very good question. If speed is the biomotor skill or biomotor ability that you want to focus on, what dance or movements will you use for a speed focus session?
In this regard, I additionally, or when I started with the speed sessions with them, what I did was I first started off with some salsa. So that's just a basic forward and back, but the whole purpose of this is with the coordination. And with salsa, it really mimics your ladder movement. So when you do the agility ladders, either to the side laterally, or you do it forward and backwards. So that is what I did in the one session. And then the other move, which I used really was sort of a grapevine movement, which is also moving side to side. And then what I would also teach them is what we call in Latin a jive. So for those that aren't really familiar with dancing, so a jive is really goes back to the swing era. It's very fast. It's got flicks and kicks in it. There's obviously ways to tone it down a bit and make it more easier for the guys. But jive is really something where it's quick feet. There's change of direction in it. And I actually can't think of a better dance in order to work on some speed.
Okay, thanks for that. Jocelyn, so we're in lockdown now. And what can a player do typically? Let's say our focus wants to be rhythmic movement and they want to keep a certain biomotor ability intact or improve that. What can they do during lockdown?
So especially now that everybody's unable to run, or some people are actually starting to run when they're at home, I would suggest focus on the 3 parts that I mentioned that I do in the intervention itself, or that I do in each session. Start with a basic warm-up, aerobic endurance warm-up, and then when you do the actual body of the session, maybe focus on doing a little bit of, you can do some salsa in it with a basic. I would also say take, for example, ballet moves, which is literally quite easy. If you just stand in one, there's 4, 5, 6 ballet positions that we know, and just standing in that position works already. Doing some what we call taps. I would also then include, what we do is the cha-cha slide that I used for the local muscular endurance session at the end. So the cha-cha slide, everybody's quite familiar with it. I mean, it's an old song. But instead of doing it while standing up, I had the guys doing this in push-up or in plank position. And I've been told that it works quite well. I had a team working on this, and they incorporated this where you do the plank position and you do the cha-cha slide, and by all means, we can't last for 3 minutes, but within a minute and a half, 2 minutes, it really works quite well. And then when you do the cool down, focusing then again on stretching, because you still then manage to get some of your mobility and flexibility in the entire session. And that is a full session, full body workout within 45 minutes to an hour.
Okay. And do you have examples like on an Instagram page, on a Twitter page, on a Facebook page of these dances that coaches can go and look at?
No, I don't. I didn't make a video actually of the guys while they were doing the session. However, I could put up a little video to show coaches what they can incorporate. And then I can post it on Facebook, or I can post it on Instagram and share it on your website, Dr. K, and then the coaches can see what they can possibly do.
Okay. And if clubs or schools want to make use of your services, where can they get hold of you?
So they can either contact me directly on email. So it's jocelynjsolomons@gmail.com. Or they can phone me as well. And I'm pretty sure I can share that information with you, Dr. K. And then coaches can get it there if they can't get hold of me on email. But on email, that's the best way.
Okay, Jocelyn. Jocelyn, thanks for your time. And I know you've got a passion for rugby, and I look forward to see you in the rugby fraternity, and also in a position where you can influence. And I think this was groundbreaking research, and also not just for yourself, but also change mindset, especially in South Africa, with regards to non-traditional training methods, because we're still stuck in and are doing things like we did 10 years ago. And I think coaches, and I think coaches need to be open-minded. And I think this is what lockdown have taught us. We can't just keep on doing the same things over and over and expect the same or different results. We need to explore. We also need to look at different avenues and different techniques to keep players stimulated. And I think this was a good example of that. So thanks for your time, and thanks for coming out. And hopefully next year or sometime when we have one again, you can come and share your experience while working at clubs and schools and implementing this. So thanks for that. Guys, we've come to the end of our 6th webinar, but before you go, we got 2 more coming. Depends on what our national situation is. It doesn't seem like we're going to get onto the field. We might continue with webinars every week. It depends on how the situation. And then, so on the 12th of May, Hanu will present on concussion management in schools and clubs. And then Andre Trudeau will present on how to build a team defense. That will be a longer session, so he'll present for about 45 minutes to an hour, and then 30 minutes Q&A. And then on Friday, we've got a rugby science forum where we'll discuss 3 topics. So Simon Deval will come in and discuss training load monitoring. Then Steph Kruger will come in. So she's busy with research on the ruck cleanout, how we can prevent injuries by teaching proper technique. And then I'll be presenting on data management, how to put the numbers game, how clubs and schools can use that. So email us or check the website, and you can sign up. So thanks for listening again, and thanks for coming. I'll make the slides and as well as the recording of the session available by email, so you can log onto that link and you can download it. And please share this information, and I think that's how we can impact coaches. So thanks for coming, and stay safe and enjoy your evening.